I think, first of all, the health system strengthening is crucial. I think we're starting to see what this crisis is revealing is the deep structural deficiencies in health infrastructure and health human capital. This sector needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency, where we now conceive programs that look at health as a global public good. So cannot anymore be seen as something that is just for the, if you're an elite and you're rich, you can go out and get the best services where they are offered. If you're poor and not in the position to access those expensive or to travel out of your country, your fate is determined by the poor services. So how do we start to program and look at public policy that conceives health as a global public good? If the poorer people are not safe, you're not safe if you're part of the elite. That's one, a big emphasis on that and investment in the health. The second one is the economy itself. The fact that this is going to shatter economies, and looking at that sector by sector. Tourism, African countries will be affected differently. The small island development states, for instance, whether you're talking about Mauritius, Seychelles, Comoros, these countries will be affected differently from landlocked countries, for instance. So looking at countries that depend heavily on transport and tourism and seeing how stimulus packages can be provided to sustain those industries in the crisis period, but also to help them recover. It's important. Also, looking at issues related to debt. Africa was already climbing and giving cause for concern on indebtedness and rising debt. This crisis will lead to additional debt if other resources are not found to help to accompany countries address the impact. And so looking at debt moratorium in some cases, because we have a lot of commercial debt, it's not all bilateral or multilateral, but also looking at relief options, debt relief options, looking at grants as opposed to expensive money. Looking at how to make Africa's money work for Africa's development and work for this COVID recovery. Where are the resources packed? The money is packed in outside of the continent, for instance, whether we're talking about pension funds or sovereign wealth funds. So Africa examining its own resources, financial resources, and how to leverage those. So that, the economy itself needs attention in the different sectors that have been hit. And then the whole social aspect, ensuring that service delivery can continue, not only in the health, but look at education, for instance. In the East Africa region alone, over 100 million kids are now out of school. Now, you and I may be able to homeschool our kids, or the schools that they go to may have online learning possibility. We know this is not true for the vast majority of people on the continent. If kids are taken out of school, there's no learning for them, and we don't know how long this is going to be for. And so some investments in tele-education that includes the poor households, not just left for those who can afford computers at home. is very critical, because why that is important is if it's not addressed, we will deepen the inequality that already exists on the continent, because by the time you have some kids who will not learn for the next 6 to 9 months and others who continue learning, we're only deepening that inequality. So that sector for me, I think it's critical to look at. First of all, we need to study that. We know that, for instance, gender-based violence has increased in this sort of period of lockdown, of anxiety, of lack of judicial measures, because the courts are also on lockdown in most cases, or at least they're not at the level of functionality that is required. So where do people get justice, especially women who are facing violence, domestic violence or gender-based violence, as those are limited? So we need to study what is happening, how this is impacting women. And UN Women has done some work on this that is now informing the plans that countries are making. And we're promoting very much through an advocacy campaign to look at the disproportionate impact on women, both in terms of impact of the violence, making sure that there is access to justice, and even if it's e-justice, and that their needs are brought to the fore. Secondly, on the economy, a lot of women, the vast majority of women, of those who work in cross-border settings, cross-border markets, 70% are women. Now, with the borders shutting down, it means you are flattening their income base and their livelihoods. Now, we need to ensure that policies that are being taken by countries, but also by sub-regions, whether it's ECOWAS or the East Africa Committee or IGAD or SADC, take into account the need to ensure open corridors for some of these cross-border livelihood opportunities to continue. I think that's another measure that needs to be taken. And in the area of education, I think making sure that girl education, when we do have the telecommuting or measures that allow kids to get back to learning, that girls are not left out, because often when hardship hits families, the girls are the ones who are released to go do the work to keep the families afloat. And so many of them are likely to miss out on critical education or learning phases during this period. So following that, accompanying that, and making sure that the girls are not shortchanged is important.